okay? Can you see? Well enough? Every culture, every people, every society has a story. Us, we have a story. For most of our history, our story had one of its crucial beginnings here. What place is this? Anybody know? This is Plymouth Rock. And as you can see, it has very conveniently the date incised on it. Surely in the year 1620, not. But since then, the date has been incised on it. The date has been incised on it because in its much diminished state, it has become a monument, an important spot, a landmark. And one of the things that making a landmark does is solidify the story in place and time. It stops the variations of the story. And it seems to make the story unassailable, true, in a very fundamental way. And at such spots in later times, there will be more documentation, sometimes arranged around it, like the sign that you will find right next to this adorable little gazebo, where the small stone that was once a large rock that was identified as Plymouth Rock, who knows, rests. And you see that the importance of the event is written down, and you know what that means. Once something gets written down, then it seems truer than ever. This looks like a link that could not be broken and could not be questioned. Here, in this spot, in this year, this event happened. Other things might have happened around it, but this is the crucial thing. This is the power of place and text. You would think that that might be the only locus for the commemoration of this crucial part of our national story, but it's not. There is an even more vivid recreation of the event in this place, which I know you all recognize as Washington, D.C. And in Washington, D.C. here, in this building, which is the United States Capitol, how many people have been here? Just out of curiosity? Oh, it gets less every year. Not so many of you go on those high school trips anymore, eh? You need to go. It's very cool. It's very, very neat. Okay, well, for those of you that have been here, good for you. And if you have done this, walked up and walked into the Capitol, and you've walked inside the Great Dome and looked up, you may have seen a series of pictorial representations that seem to solidify our story, our national story. At the top is our Lord and Creator, George. Here he is. Did you know this? Did anybody look up when you were inside the dome? Can you believe it? We used to think this. Get a load of this. It's like the Sistine Chapel. And then below it, this is something amazing. A 500-foot painted frieze that tells the story of the United States from the landing of Columbus in 1492. That's where it starts. Here he is. To, then it goes all the way around. All the way around. And then it ends up here at Kitty Hawk and the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, because that's when the frieze got finished painting. So that's when the story ends. And then, over various doorways and archways are a series of sculpted panels. And this panel here shows the landing of the Pilgrims at Plymouth Rock. And in case you were not clear that that's exactly what it was showing, there's a date handily painted on, or carved onto the boat, 1620, so that you get the story. And you see what is being emphasized. A happy nuclear family, husband, wife, child, male. A small boat, a humble Native American, or Indian as they were called then, bringing a gift, perhaps some fresh water and a seashell, to the landing folks. No manner of strife, and an obvious welcoming gesture, a sense that these people could and did readily communicate with one another. Place, text, artistic representation. What more could you need to know that an event took place in that way at that time than these elements? Well, of course, we may all now, based on what we discussed in class the other day, think that there might be something missing or even misleading about the story, even though we have it reified in stone and depicted in sculpture and commemorated on a signboard. And why? Why might we have some sort of problem with taking this story, hook, line, and sinker? What were some of the possible criticisms or deficits of depending solely on these as sources of information? Winners write the books. They could be biased. How would we know? We probably wouldn't. We weren't there, so we would have a hard time knowing if it was true. We would like to know what's the time lapse between the event and the time it's written down. And more than that, we would like to know why it was written down. Because knowing why something is commemorated helps you to get past the potential bias inherent in it. All cultures have a story. All cultures mark a time when they and their history begins. Like us, the Greeks and the Romans had a story too. The Greeks and the Romans started their story in the same place and with the same event. And here's the story. There was a mortal so magnificent, so athletically gifted, so brave and courageous that the gods themselves decided that he should have a goddess for a wife. The mortal was named Peleus, and the wife that the gods chose for him was a sea nymph named Thetis. And the wedding was a magnificent affair to which all the heroes and kings of the day and all the gods and goddesses from Mount Olympus came, except for one. one goddess was not invited to the festivities. That was the goddess Strife. You could see the problem. Why would you invite somebody named Strife to a wedding party? Well, the goddess Strife was pretty ticked off, and because she was pretty ticked off, she decided to come anyway and make trouble. And the trouble that she made was to come to the wedding. Oh, I forgot I was going to talk about this. Come to the wedding and give a present. And the present was a golden apple. And the apple was inscribed to the fairest. To the fairest. And the trouble that comes about on account of the apple is something I will come back to in about 2 minutes after I talk about what I forgot I was going to talk about here, which is, how do we know about the story that I am in the middle of telling you? How do we know about the story? You all know how we know about this story. We know about this story because this man, a blind poet named Homer, penned the epic cycles, the Iliad and the Odyssey. Or at least that's what we now suppose he did. But the stories that we have, which are written down, were not originally written down. Originally, the stories were oral. The third of the ways that we know about the past. Things that we find, things that we can read, that people have written, and things that we hear, that people say. And the Iliad and the Odyssey and the other epics, they were sung. They were long performance songs. And for many hundreds of years, they were sung and elaborated in performance. They were changed. They were expanded, they were contracted, they were rearranged. And finally, at least 400 or 500 years after the Greeks themselves thought the events occurred, Homer wrote them down. We have ancient copies of the text. This is a papyrus found in Egypt with a fragment from the Iliad. And we have modern renditions of the text. This is a page from Greek text, and it is Book 1, Iliados Alpha, Sing Muse. First 2 lines of the Iliad, of the wrath of Achilles. That's the rest of the line. Sing Muse of the wrath of Achilles. And the story, of course, as stories will, has been reimagined and reconceived by other writers over time, as in this fantastic rendition, which everybody should run right out and see if they can find on eBay, a Marvel comic book. I don't know, I should find out exactly when this is from. Adapted from the epic poem by Homer. Fantastic. All right. So back to the story. And the story where we left it has Strife having come to the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, and in her spite thrown a golden apple inscribed to the fairest, and there are 3 goddesses at the wedding. They are Hera, the queen of Mount Olympus, the wife of Zeus, Athena, the warrior goddess, one of the daughters of Zeus, and Aphrodite, the goddess of love. And each of them believes that the apple is for her, of course, because each of them believes that she is the fairest. And they cannot choose, and they begin to bicker, and we can't have that, we can't have bickering. And so Hermes takes the goddesses to a young man named Paris, who is the son of the king of Troy. Now, why, you might ask, would the gods be letting some young kid decide on this weighty question? That is a question we would all like an answer to. But the story does not elaborate. The story just tells us that this is what happened, and you just have to go along. That's the thing about stories. So, in the story, all the goddesses, led by Hermes, go to Paris, and then, as is the way of goddesses, they begin to try to bribe him. So each of them, of course, wants the apple, and they want the title. And so Hera promises Paris that she will make him king, which is in her ability to do because she is queen. And Athena promises Paris that she will give him unparalleled wisdom and strength. These are two of her attributes. And Aphrodite, totally cutting to the chase, promises that he can win the hand of the most beautiful woman in the world. Such a no contest thing. So, of course, Paris says, Aphrodite, it's you that the apple is for. And Aphrodite then sends her little emissary, Eros, known from Latin as Cupid, to the most beautiful woman in the world, who is Helen, the wife of Menelaus, one of the kings of the Greek world. He lives in a town called Sparta, and to Sparta comes Paris, and Eros works his magic on Helen, and Helen agrees to leave Menelaus and run away with Paris to Troy. And that's a problem, because all the Greek kings, and there were many, each with their own great city and army and men, all of them had promised that if anything were to happen to any one of them, all would band together and help. So Menelaus goes to his brother, the big king, Agamemnon, who is the king at Mycenae. This is all according to Homer. And says, bro, we have a problem. And Agamemnon says, no problem, we will all gather everybody, we will go to Troy, we will win Helen, we will bring her back. Fine. That seems easy. So they all sail off to Troy in all of their ships, and they spend 10 years with no effect. 10 years, no effect. Until, in the 10th year, one of the kings, Odysseus, comes up with a ruse to take the city of Troy. And the ruse is to concoct a horse on wheels so large that a strong contingent of the Greek army can hide inside. You have to imagine that there were not little windows on the side of the horse that Odysseus contrived. But if the artist would have made this horse without little windows for you to see the heads of the Greek soldiers inside, then how would you know what it was? You would not know. So that is why there are windows in this depiction of the horse. And the horse is put outside the gates of Troy, and the Trojans, again, in one of those inexplicable things that only make sense in story, especially if the storyteller goes through this part very fast, where you don't have time to say, wait a minute, that doesn't make any sense. All the Trojans come out, open the doors of their city, and say, wow, look at this. This is really interesting. Let's take it inside and see what it's like. So they wheel it inside the gates of the city, and then under cover of darkness at night, the door opens up, and all the Greek soldiers come out, and then Troy is taken, and there is a rampage, and there is fighting, and there is plunder, and there is the abduction and the killing of children, and there is rape, and there is desecration of sanctuaries, some of which you see depicted here in this Greek vase painting from the 5th century BC. The story continued to captivate and animate Greeks, authors, artists, and people for practically all of their history. And many artists came back to the story and told different aspects of it through their representations. So sometimes the aspects that they told were the trickery, and sometimes it was the bravery of the fighters, and sometimes it was the horrors of war, and sometimes it was the humanity behind the people. So here, for example, you see a warrior, a Greek warrior. He may be leaving or he may be arriving back home, but he is in his house. His wife is seated here in a chair. He, I like to think, is returning and handing his helmet over to emphasize that he has come home and he won't be fighting anymore. But, you know, that's the thing about art. You are allowed to think what you want to think about it. What I want you to think about right now is this. What do you think you know about what might have happened based on this story? Talk to the person next to you or the person behind you or the person in front of you. Come up with as many things as you can think of. What do you think you know from the story about Troy? Go. All right. What do you think you know about the story of Troy? I'm going to start with you and we're going to go right down your row. Okay, so everybody in your row. What do you think you know?
The people that fled from Troy eventually became the Romans.
You are like looking ahead. Some of the people, yes. We'll get to that in about early November. Yeah, but you don't know that from the story that I told you. What do you think you know about? They must have had strong defenses. That you think you know that. They must have had strong defenses. Why do you think you know that? Because they held on for 10 years. So the city of Troy must have had strong defenses. What do you think you know?
Well, it shows like human nature, people's pride, wanting things that you don't have.
So
Because
we.
it started out with the apple. It's just God is like, I'm the prettiest, I'm the fairest, and it's really like not a big deal.
So we think that we know that the Greeks were prideful people. Okay, we know that the Greeks were full of pride. You should be writing all of these things down. What do you think you know?
We know about the epic battle between Hector and Achilles as well.
We think we know that there was an epic battle between Hector and Achilles because in the part of the story that I did not tell you, in book 22, there is an epic battle between Hector and Achilles. Who are Hector and Achilles?
Basically
Great commanders of their respective armies. Hector on the Trojan side and Achilles on the Greek side. Next in that row, what do you think you know? Nothing else? Like, what about the places that are mentioned in the story? What about the places that are mentioned in the story? Should they exist? You don't know? You think you would not necessarily assume from this story that a place called Troy existed? Well, I mean, the story certainly implies a place called Troy. What other places does the story seem to suggest must have existed? Greece, Sparta, the other cities. Where is Agamemnon, the brother of Menelaus, from? Mycenae. So there must be these places. Troy, Sparta, Mycenae. And what about these places? What about these places? Let me go to a back row, you in the yellow. Chewing on your pen. Yep, you. What about them? Who is in charge? Kings. These were places that had kings. These were places that had kings. What else? All the way back. What about the relationship relationship between the king of Sparta and the king of Mycenae? They're brothers. They're related to one another. So they're kings. They're each kings, but they are similar to each other. I mean, the things from their places ought to be kind of like each other. Are they the only kings involved? No. In fact, there are many, many cities named in the epic. What about how the Greeks and the Trojans deal with each other? Think about that panel that I showed you from the United States Capitol. The landing of the Pilgrims, that nice Indian fellow with his little water-filled shell or whatever that is supposed to be. What do you assume when you look at that? We didn't kill him off. Yes. Indeed, yeah, we came in peace. Ha ha ha. What else do you assume when you look at that?
That they got along, or at least were on equal terms.
That they got along. How about something even more fundamental? They could communicate. Thank you, they could communicate. It certainly looks like that. They could communicate. And what about the Trojans and the Achaeans, the Greeks?
They could communicate, or they even like had the same language.
Not only could they communicate, not only did they have the same language, how does Paris get a hold of Helen in the first place? He goes to Sparta, where he's welcomed into the home of Menelaus. They could have the same language, they could communicate, but they also had the same customs. They come from the same sort of world. A strong city ruled by a king. Many cities linked up with one another on the Greek side, also ruled by kings. A proud people, vain perhaps, very interested in their reputation and how they appear, warlike. And both of these peoples able to communicate with each other. I cannot resist. Who's seen it? Oh, so I didn't even need to tell you any of the story. That's how I could start. Who's seen the movie? Okay, well, you know everything now because this is very faithful, would you not say? Okay. According to Homer, Troy was a real place. He located it on the Asiatic side of the Dardanelles. The Dardanelles are this little waterway here that connect the Aegean with the Sea of Marmara and then in turn the Black Sea through that. And here you see a big view of the Dardanelles. And the Dardanelles separate Europe from Asia. For any of you World War I fans, Gallipoli is right here. Oh, there it is, up there. And the battlefield is here, where the famous World War I battle took place. Okay, so Homer says that someplace on the Asiatic side of the Dardanelles was this mighty fortress city. And in the plain, near two rivers, one of which is called in Homer's text and still today the Scamander, here, there was a little town called Hisarlik. And Hisarlik lay on the edge of a large plateau, which was called by the locals Ilion. Ilion is the name of the site in the Epic of Homer. That's why the book is called the Iliad, because the site is called Ilion. And believing in this text, believing in this story, as if it was the front page of the New York Times, this man, Heinrich Schliemann, hey, how come this is not all on the screen? Oh, hold on just one second here. Hold on. Where is the projection thing? How do I do this now? There's supposed to be a little, go away. No. Let's see. Are there any smart computer people here? Where is the projection size thing? Go to view? No, it's not there. It's in the, oh, there it is. Now I've got it up here. Now, I have written down here 1024 by 768. Well, that's right. Go away. I don't need you. Is it all on here now? No. That is not okay with me. System preferences. Rats! Oh, well, we'll just have to continue on. I'll have to get this fixed for next time. So the date here should be 1887. All right, so to this site, in the latter part of the 19th century, this fellow, Heinrich Schliemann, came believing in this book as if it was Holy Writ. And this was the place that he came to. And you see a large mound, this is the edge of the mound, and a plain, and then the Dardanelles in the distance. Very, very like the description in Homer. And he began digging pretty furiously and fast. He began digging to prove that the story was true. He dug down, 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 and you see here the lowest levels that he came to. He dug through 9 levels of cities until he came to this lowest level. At this lowest level, which he called Troy 1, he didn't find anything very impressive. He found long stone walls that could have been the walls of long houses, but nothing rich, nothing defended, nothing that would suggest that a king had lived here, and therefore, obviously, nothing that could go with the story. So this couldn't be it. But in the level immediately above Troy 1, and I remind you here that the mound is high, and you have to imagine peeling back layer after layer after layer until you get all the way down. In the level here, above Troy 1, that was a different story. Here he found the remains of long stone buildings. This one is 35 meters long, so pretty substantial. And not just one, but many such buildings. The one you were looking at is right here, but you see several others And those buildings were within a fortification wall. This style of building, long with the entrance on the short side instead of the long side, is a general sort of plan that Greek archaeologists call a megaron, M-E-G-A-R-O-N. A megaron is a long building with an entrance on its short side. It can have 2 or 3 rooms, but the point is simply the orientation. There Schliemann found 2 entrances to this compound, this walled compound. And the entrances were very impressive. There were ramps. This ramp is 10 meters long, and it's 4 meters wide. It's paved. It's very, very, very nice, very strong and well built, very impressive. And in the corner between the wall and the ramp, Schliemann found evidence. Just hold that thought. So here you see a reconstruction drawing of the Troy II citadel, the walls, the large buildings, the megara. Megara is the plural of megaron. Megara is if you have more than one megaron, because it's Greek. So there were several megara, a couple of larger megara, and then some subsidiary structures around. The main megaron had its own wall and its own little gateway. The enormous ramps leading in and the covered gateways leading in give you the sense of an important place, an established place, a citadel. And then right down here in that corner between the ramp and the wall, Schliemann found a cache of gold and bronze vessels and jewelry, indicating the wealth, the connections, the prestige of the people who lived here. So here you have the Troy II level and the area where the gold was found. Oh, wait, I don't want to go. Do I want to do that now? No. In fact, I want to go here to read you something which is around here somewhere. Oh, yeah, here it is. When Schliemann found this, he was sure that he had found the citadel of Priam, the citadel of Troy, the citadel that was written about and sung about, told about in the story. And he even identified the gates. He identified this, for example, as the Schliemann gate from one of the most famous passages in the Iliad, in Book 3 of the Iliad. And for those of you that are thinking about doing question set 1, this is a small part of the passage of Book 3, which is relevant to that question. In that, there is an episode where Hector and Menelaus agree that there will be an end to the battle because Hector's younger brother Paris, he the abductor of Helen, has agreed to fight Menelaus one-on-one. Hector addressed both sides. You Trojans, you well-armed Achaeans, Paris and war-loving Menelaus here will fight it out alone between the armies for Helen and for all her property. Whichever one comes out victorious, the stronger man, let him seize all the goods and take the woman as his wife back home. And And then Hector sent 2 heralds to the city to summon Priam. And Iris, who is one of the messenger deities of the gods of Olympus, came to Helen, and she said, "Come with me. Paris and war-loving Menelaus are going to fight for you. The man who triumphs will call you his wife." So Helen left her house and soon reached the Scaean gates. This was the gate identified by Schliemann as the gate written and sung about by Homer. And there, it says in the text, sat Priam and his entourage. Seeing Helen approach the tower, they commented softly to each other, "There's nothing shameful about the fact that Trojans and well-armed Achaeans have endured great suffering a long time over such a woman, just like a goddess, awe-inspiring, beautiful." And so they talked, and while they talked, Priam called out to Helen, "Come here, dear child. Sit down in front of me. As far as I'm concerned, you bear no blame, for I blame the gods. They drove me to wage this wretched war against the Achaeans." All of the points that you isolated before as things you know about the story are emphasized in this excerpt. There are kings, there are armies, there are shared customs, shared language, shared attitudes, such that Priam could call to Helen and have her sit down, and the story actually goes on to have Helen identify for Priam all of the people who are fighting. Oh, that's just beautiful. Schliemann was sure he had found the place. Just one problem. As was made clear shortly after the death of Schliemann and the next phase of excavations at the site, there were above the Troy II remains, and these had been found by Schliemann, many other cities, as I told you, many other levels of remains. And they could be roughly dated. Now, in Greek historical reckoning, there's a date for the Trojan War. And the date for the Trojan War is the 12th century BCE. It's the year 1184. The Greeks were pretty precise. When you have an historical event, it's good to be precise. That's why 1620 keeps getting written all over the place on the Pilgrim's Landing, on the boats, on the sculptures, on the plaques. A date makes it real. 1184, said the Greeks. They figured it out, based on genealogies and the dates of the Olympiads and the stories in Homer and so on and so forth. And Troy II is a little early for that, like a millennium early for that, or more. That'd be 1,000 years. So that's not okay. So we have a great city, and we have a wealthy city, and we have a walled city, but we don't have the city that could have been that city.
I just want to go back and ask, why was the stuff that Schliemann found outside the city?
Why were the jewels outside the city wall? Excellent question. Hard to know. Troy II was destroyed. That is to say, it had been burned. Whether it was an accident or on purpose, not clear. It could have been part of an array of goods that were thrown over to be taken away, but then got lost or couldn't be retrieved in the scuffle. It could be stuff that just had been on the move with somebody, but fallen out, or got moved at a later time. Got dug up by somebody at a later time, but then lost. So we don't really know, and it might have been possible with different excavation techniques to know more about the context of the original discovery, but not from the way that Schliemann recovered them in the 1880s. Not only did he recover them in a kind of fast and furious manner, but he was not so good at the note-taking or any other kind of recording about it, so we don't have actually any records whatsoever. 2. There are a few other cities, 3, 4, 5, and then above those, a city that lasted for about 500 years, half a millennium, the 6th level of Troy, so called Troy 6. And just to emphasize that archaeology happens because people make it happen. It's not just about people, it's by people. These are the people who have excavated Troy. So in addition to Heinrich Schliemann, his assistant Wilhelm Dürpfeld, who excavated in 1893 to 1894, and he's the person who figured out that Troy 2 couldn't be the Troy of Homer. Carl Blagan, who actually is the brother of the Blagan of Blagan Hall here at the University of Minnesota, so I always like to put him up on the screen. And he came from here, but he couldn't get a job here at the time because his brother already had a job here in the botany department. And there was a nepotism rule that a relative couldn't be hired here when somebody was already working. So he went off to the University of Cincinnati, and they gave him money, and he went and excavated Troy for many years, 6 years, as you can see. And then beginning from 1988 and lasting until 2000, Manfred Korfmann. The end of this is Mann, M-A-N-N. I worked at Troy for many years, and I worked with Manfred, and he's dead now, but I just love this picture. He was a very enthusiastic man. All right. Troy 6. Troy 6 is a city with solid walls, as you see here, built out of ashlar blocks. Ashlar blocks are blocks that are cut from stone in squares, square blocks, and these ashlar walls were stone all the way through. Solid stone all the way through were these walls. They were, let's see, I have some measurements here. 4 to 5 meters thick. That's 12 feet. 12 feet thick. 6 meters high. That's 27 feet. Just the stone. And then there was a mud brick superstructure that went above them. So they were extremely formidable and very, very long. They were about 1,500 feet long in their extent. The walls are built in a very specific way with offsets. You can see these offsets here. It means that they were built in sections. And that makes them stronger if you need something even stronger than a solid stone wall 12 feet thick. Because the sections are not linked one to another so carefully so that if you get one part gone, then it's easy to rebuild it again. And in addition, no, I think that's it. So that thick and mud brick wall superstructure on the top. In Troy 6, there were lots of gates to the city, and outside the gates were evidence of the people who lived here, some aspects of their religious belief system. Nobody has ever found a temple or a cult place here, not in any of these early levels. But you see outside the gate here this enormous stone platform, and standing up in it an upright stone, a solid upright stone. A solid standing upright stone is called, it would be called an obelisk if it was in Egypt, and very, 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 very tall. But here it's called a stele. Sorry, that's so much less dramatic than an obelisk, I know. A stele, S-T-E-L-E. And there were stelae, S-T-E-L-A-I, many stelae, at the gates, at all of the gates of the city. And these strong standing stones were probably seen as a kind of protective device guarding the gates of the city. You note that they don't depict anything. There's not writing on them. There's not any picture on them. They're just straight standing stone. So here in this plan, you can see, if you were looking in a bird's eye view, Troy 2 with its megaron and its walls and its ramp, and how much larger the city of Troy 6 was. Very, very large. Why do we have Troy 6 is in red, Troy 2 is in yellow? Why is there no Troy 6 plan in this area here? First of all, is this the same level? It's lower, right. So if you're looking at this, you have to imagine this is kind of like a pit in the middle. This is all higher up. This is lower. So in other words, Schliemann went through this level to get to this level. But he didn't record any of it. So we don't know what the Troy 6 remains are in this area. They're gone. They're just gone.
If Schliemann dug through Troy 6 to get to Troy 1, why didn't he realize Troy 6 was more impressive architecture?
Well, Schliemann didn't really realize much. That's the truth. He didn't realize that the levels were different cities. He was looking for walls, palaces, and riches. He was looking for something that he could call the Troy of Priam, the Troy of Homer. And he stopped pretty much when he thought he had that, that was Troy 2.
But even if he was looking at the walls, he had to dig through the fortifications we just talked about, since they're big, so why didn't he see that it's a big wall?
He did, but he didn't see anything else. He didn't see a palatial structure. And one of the reasons he didn't is because while it is true that Schliemann dug through this area, he was not the first person to dig through this area. The Romans and the Greeks and the Romans were actually the first people to dig through this area because they had put a temple in much later times on the very top of the middle of the mound, and the foundations for the temple got dug down. They dug down just the way you do today when you're digging something. See that big parking? There used to be a parking lot just up past the dinky dome, and now there's a big hole in the ground. So that's what happens. Something later, sometimes its foundations go down, and so it's quite likely that the Greeks and the Romans had destroyed whatever was here from Troy 6, so that there wasn't much left for Schliemann to find there until he got down to the Troy 2 level. What are some of the sorts of buildings in Troy 6? What are these sorts of buildings, like this one, for example? A megaron, right. They are also megara. They're megara, not only, but some on the outskirts of this city. Lagan, when he came to excavate here in the 1930s, investigated more carefully these various levels. Dürrfeld was of the mind that Troy 6 could well be the Troy of Homer. That looked more like the Troy of Homer, and it was closer in date. Lagan didn't believe that that could be the Troy of Homer because there was a level that came after Troy 6, and in the level that came after Troy 6, it looked as if the people who lived here were preparing for war. They were preparing for siege. They installed a drainage system, a new drainage system, inside the main streets to help collect water. You see some of the additional stelae in front of the gate in this slide too, I just need to point out. They enclosed part of their defensive system, so here's part of the Troy 6 wall, and in the Troy 6 period, it was all open. So it's very easy to walk through. But in the next period, Troy 7a, which lasts, as you can see, for about 100 years, from 1300 to 1200, these various bastions were built to enclose parts of the access into the city, to give areas more room to guard. And inside the walls of the city on the citadel, more houses were crammed in. And you see some of the house walls crammed in. So instead of having these several large, open, separated buildings, there were more and more houses crammed in, and huge jars like these that you see here, which were for water, were built in under the floors of the houses. This level, Troy 7a, with its increased fortifications and its apparent preparation for siege, and its date very, very close to the historical date of 1184, the date that the Greeks gave to the Trojan War. This is the level that Blagan said showed that Homer was right, there was a war, this is the place, and this is the city that succumbed to the Greeks. For what happens archaeologically after that, you'll have to wait till Tuesday. See you then. Have a great weekend.